Oh, you're such a well-trained audience. Well done. Thank you. Good hush. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to join us tonight. It's wonderful to see almost full room. I know it's a little bit hot and sort of steamy in here. Hopefully the aircon will kick in soon and we'll be okay. My name's Professor Michelle Ryan and I'm the Director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership here at the ANU, and I'm going to be facilitating the discussion this evening. I'd really like to just start off by acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and any First Nations people in the room with us tonight. At the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, our work is really focused on advancing gender equality in all its forms, but particularly in workplaces and particularly in leadership roles. And we're very interested in how systems and structures can be changed to achieve gender equality. Questions of time and care and how these might be gendered, paid work and unpaid work and what is valued is really at the heart of everything that we do. So it's really exciting to be meeting today and talking about these issues. At Dual, we're really delighted to be partnering with the ANU's National Centre for Epidemiology and Population Health, and their work really brings, a really important aspect of how health plays into these inequalities as well. So how time is organised, how it's valued and how it affects health really has a big input on gender equality, but also for health and wellbeing more generally as well. We've got a big lineup tonight, and so I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a rundown on what to expect this evening. So we're going to start off with a keynote address from Padma Raman, who's the Executive Director of the Office for Women in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. We'll then be joined up on stage with Professor Lyndall Strazdins and Annabel Crabb for a conversation about work, time and gender. And following that, Padma will come back on the stage and also be joined by Senator Barbara Pocock, so we can explore what some of these challenges mean for policy and practice and for change as well. We'll then open up discussion with the audience as well, so if you've got questions ticking over in your head, keep them till that point, and there'll be a roving mic and a chance to engage in the conversation as well. And then we'll have, to close the evening, some final reflections from Barbara, and then we'll meet for canapes out the front. So everyone got it? About an hour and a half from canapes is where we are. So at some point, not quite yet, but at some point there's going to be action happening up here on the screen behind us as well. So we're very fortunate to be joined tonight by the incredible artist Dr. Erin Walsh, who'll be live scribing the event as well as it unfolds. So keep an eye out for that as well. Okay, I think that's my initial duties done. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Padma Raman. Padma is the Executive Director of the Office for Women in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and she brings a wealth of experience across gender equality, human rights and public policy as well. She's previously led Australia's National Research Organisation for Women's Safety and the Australian Human Rights Commission, and her work has consistently focused on how systems and institutions can better support women's safety, wellbeing and participation. Please join me warmly in welcoming Padma Raman to the stage.
Thank you, and can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my deep respects to elders past and present. I find that a really moving and important thing to do, especially as a migrant woman to this country. For those of you expecting a keynote, Annabel just suggested that I should tell you it's a wee note, because I wasn't expected to say much apart from give you some opening remarks and really frame this discussion in what's happening in Australia around gender equality at the moment. So we have a government that's in its second term. In its first term, it was very clear that it wanted to centre gender equality in all decision-making and reintroduced a whole lot of processes that had gone by the wayside, including gender-responsive budgeting, which basically means you have to do a gender analysis of any policy proposal that comes before the Cabinet. So one of the big changes that this government made in its first term was to elevate the position of the people who don't know this. I didn't know this a couple of years ago, but created a DepSec role, a Deputy Secretary role in Prime Minister and Cabinet to head the Office for Women, which was an elevation from before. And one of my first jobs in that role was to develop Australia's first ever gender equality strategy. And it was an interesting exercise in trying to work out what a gender equality strategy should do. And after a few conversations with the Minister, because the office had been trying to work on this for some time and were really struggling with it, after a few conversations with the Minister, it became clear that what she was looking for was a strategy for women that acknowledged the historical discrimination and disadvantage that women have faced, but also acknowledges that gender equality benefits all of us and all genders. So the gender equality strategy that was released 2 years ago on International Women's Day basically says that there's a foundation upon which all of this sits, and the foundation is deeply stubborn gendered stereotypes, which Australia is very good at, the stubborn bit. On top of that, we will not reach gender equality or make progress towards gender equality unless we work on 5 main areas. And the 5 areas, and they're all connected, and we'll be talking about them tonight: eliminating violence against women, balancing paid and unpaid care, looking at women's economic security and insecurity, dealing with women's health, and finally women's role in decision-making and leadership. And it says that rather than thinking that you need gender equality before you get to those things, it recognises that you need to make big structural changes to get to gender equality. And I can proudly say that this government, I wasn't a bureaucrat before I came into this role, but it is wonderful to be working in a government that is deliberate about centering gender equality in all that it does. And we see that with big structural changes that have been made, and again, we can go into this in more detail when we're talking, but changes to paid parental leave, changes to childcare, changes to putting gender equality into the Fair Work Act, giving women access to domestic and family violence leave. The list goes on, but these are big structural changes, and we see that when you're deliberate about placing gender equality at the heart, we've seen the gender pay gap drop, and we've seen the highest level of women's participation in the workforce. We've still got some stubborn, again, issues around part-time work and a few other things around work and women. Anyway, the strategy is called Working for Women. I would invite you all to look at it and to get a sense. The Minister calls it her to-do list. It's a sort of 10-year roadmap of what we need to do, but we're exceptionally busy working on the next big structural changes. For example, at the moment, the Office for Women's working on systems abuse, which is really how Commonwealth systems can be used by perpetrators of violence to continue to harass, intimidate and violate their current or former partners. Systems like child support are really good examples of that. So we've got a long list of things to do, but it's also wonderful to be at ANU. I'm also, for my sins, a member of the ANU Council. So I've got a very strong, I shouldn't say for my sins, it's a wonderful institution. And I also went to ANU back in the 80s and early 90s, so I've got a great fondness for this institution, and it's wonderful to see you all here and really look forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
I think we definitely classify that as a keynote and not a we note. Thank you so much, Padma, for those really thoughtful opening remarks. So I'm really delighted to bring us to the main conversation this evening. Tonight we're joined by 2 people whose work has profoundly shaped how we understand time, work and gender in Australia. So I'm just delighted, first of all, to introduce Professor Lyndall Strazdins, a professor and ARC Future Fellow at ANU's National Centre for Epidemiology and Population Health, and one of Australia's leading researchers on work, family and wellbeing. Her research examines how time pressures shape health and gender equality, particularly for families who are balancing paid work and care and study. She regularly advises government on social and health policy, and she's the author of The Unequal Hour, How Time is Shaping Health, which is just behind her there as well. And her work has been central to establishing time as a social determinant of health, including through her recent development of the concept, the hourglass ceiling, which we'll be talking about later tonight. We're also thrilled to be joined by Annabel Crabb, who I think probably needs no introduction to this audience, but I'll introduce you anyway. One of Australia's most respected journalists, authors and commentators, and a writer at large for the ABC. Over a long career in political journalism, Annabel has become known for her sharp analysis, wit, and ability to make complex questions of power, work and gender accessible to a wide audience. She's the author of several best-selling books, including The Wife Drought, which is here behind us, a landmark exploration of how Australian workplaces and social norms disadvantage women, particularly mothers, and shape who has access to time, opportunity, and power. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation, so please join me in welcoming Professor Lyndall Strazdins and Annabel Crabb.
Michelle, we should let people know it's a Q&A.
Yes, I think I did say that in the rundown. So I think...
You'll get your chance.
Yes. So definitely think up all of your questions and thoughts and we'll have a roving mic later as well.
I just want to watch the screen though. Is that wrong? I feel like I have a short attention span, people.
We will be emailing the screen out to people as well.
Thank
so
you.
everyone who's booked a ticket, and for those people that have just wandered in off the street, you might not get it, but everyone else will get it emailed to you. Okay. Shall we get into it? Let's go. Okay. So maybe just to start us off, I'd like each of you to tell me a little bit about your work on gender and jobs and time. And I'm sort of interested in that aha moment, that sort of where you sort of just went, oh yeah, I've got to spend some time looking at this. Lyndall, should we start with you?
Well, okay. Look, that's such a big question. So I kind of reckon the best way to sort of bring you into that would be to just tell you the ahas, because I think they kind of tell the story. So go back a long time, and my first aha was sitting, I'm a clinical psychologist as well as an academic, and I was sitting in a case conference, and it was about a very depressed man who was being released from hospital. He's had 2 kids, his wife was working to support, he wasn't able to cope with work. And everyone sitting around the table was like, it's going to be tough for him, it's a big transition, he needs more support, we'll ask his wife. And I sat there and thought, how will she do that? And that was invisible to the thinking. So that was the first aha. I was like, how? And it was like a tap. We turn on the social support and we turn it off later. So the second aha was fast forward about 10 years. So I did quite a lot of work on that part of that idea, this idea of emotional work, and started to think there's a work that happens around looking after other people's feelings. Then fast forward about 10 years, and I was sitting in a room, eminent scholars, solving big problems, saving the planet. Got to cut CO2 emissions, got to address the chronic disease burdens that are proliferating. What could we do? Big idea. Let's get everyone out of their cars. Let's get them onto bikes, let's get them walking, let's get the bus, let's do all that. Let's make it harder to drive a car, and let's make it easier to have public transport. 2 goals. They'll be healthier and will reduce CO2. And I sat there thinking, whose life goes to work and back again? Just that. What life goes back to work and home again? And it seemed again there was this inability to think in terms of policy making about other people's lives that weren't that simple, weren't that linear, and certainly didn't have that time pressure. And then that then really got me thinking about my research area, which is population health. And we know a huge amount about money. We know how important money is for health. But we actually didn't think about time. And in fact, we give our time to make money, so the 2 things are in lockstep. And we have had no theory about time at all. And yet we're asking people to give time to be healthy. And every single thing any of us do will take time if we want to be healthy. And there was no theory, no thinking in the field at that time. So they were the 3 aha moments for me.
So this is what I really love so much about the way Lyndall approaches things, and her book is a really good example of this. You know, I think a natural part of the human state is we get stuck in orthodoxies. You know, we have assumptions that we gather from when we're confused about stuff. We look at the people around us and see how they cope with us, and we think probably odds on that must be the most sensible way to cope with life because everybody seems to be doing it. But humans en masse are kind of bad at questioning their own orthodoxies, and one of them is, you know, what role does time play? how elastic is it, whose time do we value, what jobs do we think are important and need to be preserved. All of these things are absolutely available for question. But when we've been doing things in a certain way for a really long time, we're weirdly disinclined to do so. And I think, your conference table where they go, all right, who's going to help this guy? Who's around? She looks committed. Let's ask her, even though she's obviously going out of her mind. So I think the aha moment that I had that made me write The Wife Drought, which, I wrote really fast because I had small children and a job, but it went brrr, was, I think, because I'd worked in journalism and had started out as a young childless reporter, lots and lots of contemporaries. And then when I'd been doing it for about 10 years, I noticed that a lot of the guys that I started with had been, were starting to become editors and stuff. And then a lot of the women that I'd started with had either not had kids and been advancing, or had kids or married guys who were then editors, or there was a real gender pattern to it because, and I worked in newspapers, the daily pattern of a newspaper is insanely inconsistent with looking after children because they get very needy at exactly the same time, like about 6 p.m. And so doing both is very tricky. And then because I was working around politics, and by this stage I was actually commuting back and forth between Sydney and Canberra with my child for sitting weeks. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. Anyway, that kid is now at ANU, by the way. I'm unable to come tonight because she's going to a feminist group meeting. I'm like, okay, all right. I was watching politicians juggle their sort of ridiculous workload, which is showing up to Canberra 20 weeks a year, and that has particular consequences for mothers because they get very full-on feedback from constituents about leaving their children and so on. And so I was watching how mothers dealt with this differently from fathers in politics. And then I remember there was an International Women's Day where I kind of snapped and I wrote a column about, because I think there was a big debate on why there aren't more women going into politics, and oh God, is it because, the parliament's so rough and brutal, and oh God, is it because, men are such scoundrels, etc. And I just sort of wrote this column saying, well, look, if we just organised an airdrop of wives across the parliamentary area for all of these women in politics, the same as the men get, then that would sort everybody right out. And then I went away for a couple of days, and then when I came back, my inbox was full of just all these people, women who'd written in saying, that's exactly the same in my work, And then I got a real rush of blood, and I thought, I'll write a book about this. And then I regretted it profoundly for the weeks and months that ensued. But yeah, that was my aha moment.
Well, I'm pleased you persevered and got that done, because we've all benefited from that. So, Annabel, you talked there about the orthodoxies and how we don't question the orthodoxies, and I thought maybe we could do that, we could question it. So I'm interested in, if we think about time as a social construct, well, how do we construct it? Like, what does it mean to us? How do we measure it? How do we conceive of it? Because I think you can't really sort of unpack all of the things we want to unpack unless we sort of start with time itself.
We're in a country that was one of the first to put parameters around working hours. And this is where Lyndall starts in her book, and it's a really valuable point to make because we're one of the first places where we measured time and said, okay, well, to live a decent life, you need to have a certain set of restrictions on the amount of hours you're required to work to allow you to do the rest of the stuff, right? You take up the story from here.
Actually, there's this beautiful banner, and it's the 8-hour day, which they used to march under, and it has 8, 8, 8. And that's like, here's the 24 hours. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for recreation. That was called time rights. And Annabel's right, we were actually one of the first places. But you see, they left something off. There was another 8 there. And that's our problem, because it wasn't on the flag, it hasn't been in the thinking, hasn't been in the policy, hasn't been seen as a right, and it hasn't been adjusted once 48% of our workforce became women. And so for every single person in this country who works, a third of them have some significant care. But that flag hasn't changed yet.
Because we haven't counted it we've counted it imperfectly, but essentially, the amount of thought that went into actually setting out and putting a number on the number of hours you could do paid work in a given work week, counting it was really important and valuing it was really important. But because we've never done anything so rash as actually pay for domestic work, even though there have been a few hilarious attempts to do it, including by the first woman ever elected to an Australian Parliament, Edith Cowan, who was elected to the West Australian Parliament in 1921. She actually moved a piece of legislation to pay women for domestic work. And of course, she got laughed out of town, but it was a very valiant attempt. But yeah, if you don't count it, then you don't value it. And our attempts that we've made to really properly measure this over our contemporary history have been kind of a bit stop-start, with the honourable exception, of course, of Barb Pocock, who is coming up after the break.
But this is sort of the weird thing, because we don't count it and we obsess over it. We do both. It's so interesting, and that's what I love about time, because we both count every minute, and it's billable hours in some places, and we run our whole lives by the clock. Even our kids have to run their lives by the clock, and they don't even know what a clock is, but they have to.
Tell us quickly, tell us about the history of the clock, because I love this bit in your book.
Well, so we all think the clock is time, but it only showed up in the medieval times as a thing that sat in the town square, and it was when they got the clock to actually really be accurate that we got trains, then we got schedules.
Light trains, though. Is that bad?
Everything began to run on time, including us. So it's this, we live in this extraordinary world where none of us could live without paying complete attention to time. We are at the beck and call of our time, and yet we don't count some time. We fudge it, we pretend that we can do things we can't possibly do. We ask someone to help us and say, could you just? We simply ignore some people's time and count others.
Can I just follow up on that? So is this, this is not just an accidental oversight, right? Like it tells us something about what we value, what we see as important and those sorts of things.
Time is stretchier depending on the circumstance, right? Because if I'm terrified and I've just remembered that I have to do something in 15 minutes, I can do almost anything in 15 minutes, sometimes 2 to 3 things at once. But there are other times when I can go 4 hours and achieve nothing. I also think that I can get anywhere in 20 minutes, which is seriously ill-informed because I live in Sydney. It very rarely works out. But if you're only doing one thing and it's something on which you have a clear mind to devote yourself and appropriate support to do that work, then time does feel as though it can be packaged up into 6-minute units, right? Because as long as you're in a place that's quiet and you know what you're doing and you've got time to do it, then you can do your job in a way that is sort of predictable. When time starts to warp and bend is when you're trying to do 5 or 6 things at once, and you're capable of extraordinary things, but then you also end up seriously depleted and you can't really keep it up forever. And I think that is one of the issues that women have faced in the Australian workforce, over the last century is, the move into the paid workplace of Australian women has not really been matched by a movement the other way. And so it's kind of ended up being women's time having to be more elastic and stretching sometimes, eating away into all of the things that they might otherwise be using that lovely spare 8 hours a day to do, which, as all research tells us the stuff that women stop doing when they have substantial work-life interference is the stuff that they do for themselves, keeping fit, catching up with people, reading books for pleasure, all of that sort of stuff. It sort of is the gear that falls by the wayside. And I think that, I'm not against time being elastic. I think that's quite an exciting concept. When it works out, it's great. But I think we have a set of assumptions about how time elasticity works, from whom it can be expected, and who's most entitled to have quiet time to do set tasks in a peaceful way.
Yeah, and I really like, Lyndall, for you to expand on this, the idea of how power plays into control of time, the elasticity of time, who gets time.
Just sit at an airport and watch who gets on the plane first. That tells you whose time matters. You pay for it and you get there faster. Go to a doctor. Who waits? So you can find out a lot about time, about who gets to wait, whose time matters, how long, how that works.
See who ends up on juries as well.
Yeah, that's right. So time is actually a sign of people's status in lots and lots of ways. It's built into it. People can use their money, but also their importance. And their time is different. They're treated different. They're given quite different entitlement to time. And then that plays out in jobs. So, for example, a well-paid job, you can earn a lot of money for your time. But what if you're a cleaner? You spend the same time, but you earn so much less. So there's a reckoning of people's time that just plays out across all these lines of who matters and who doesn't matter. And it's like seams. It goes right through the labour market, and then it shows up in the home as well.
And it's not just how much, a 6-minute unit of time is valued, it's also the flexibility of that. The CEO that's making the big bucks can also go play golf when he wants to, or leave early, or do all of those things. The cleaner is not going and playing a round of golf on a Thursday afternoon, right?
Remember I was talking to a barrister that I know. This is back ages ago when I was writing this book. And she was the only woman in her chambers. And it was a pretty posh chambers, and there was lots of dudes, and she'd been appointed, and it was everyone was a bit, ooh, a lady. And so she was completely fine because she's an absolute weapon. But after about a year or so, another vacancy came up in the chamber. And I'm obsessed with barristers. It's like a feudal system. It's the strangest. I could have talked to her forever, and I thought I'll write another book about how barristers work because it is wild. Anyway, I won't go into it, but she'd proposed a second woman to join the chambers. And this was a younger woman, and the dudes who were the druid circle, making the decision about who would be admitted, said to this woman, well, look, I don't know about this lady you're proposing. I mean, she's in her late 30s. I mean, she'll probably just want to have babies and go part-time. And the barrister that I was talking to said to these chaps, guys, you work 3 days a week because you sail the other 2 days. What are you talking about? But there was this sort of completely unreflective assumption that, part-time's all right for me because I'm incredibly clever and important and I like sailing very much. But what about this chick who's going to have babies? I mean, that's going to be a disaster.
And part of that is about compatibility of different parts of your time, right? Because sailing is seen as being absolutely compatible with being a barrister or being successful.
Well, I find it wonderfully refreshing.
Apparently,
I mean, yeah. I prefer a large boat with a staff.
Yeah. Whereas caring for your children or, doing the school run or doing those things is seen as incompatible. And we know actually there's research that shows that when women are out of the workforce because of maternity leave, the views of them once they come back because of the time that they've spent and what they've spent doing their time is there's very clear stereotypes about those things. If a man takes a year off because he's gone and done an MBA or because he's sailed around the world or climbed Everest or whatever other thing they're scaling at the time, that's seen as self-improvement and good, and it will make him a better person. So it's not just how you spend it or even what you spend, but how people think about how you spend your time as well.
And dads get that pushback too. if they take the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, Lyndall, let's move to the hourglass ceiling. Can you tell me about it? Because we've sort of got some anecdotes here around women and what that means. But how does it really affect one's career? Tell us about it.
Okay, so all of you in this room will know what a glass ceiling is. It's that stubborn fact that even though women are as educated and as qualified as men, they don't make it to the top jobs. And lots of research saying, well, it's gender bias. I think you had a chapter in your book saying it's because women are, putting themselves forward, or men are being mean and locking women out. Well, actually, I think there's a really practical reason as well, which is that those jobs are incredibly long hours. And the evidence that we've been looking at is showing that as jobs get more paid, so we've got three sorts of jobs in this country. We've got part-time, full-time and long full-time. A third of our labour market works beyond 38 hours. That's meant to be our full-time week, but a third works past it, and they earn the big bucks. But they work the long hours. And as you work the long hours, the number of men in those jobs go up. And there's just no coincidence there, because the women are down here in the short hours, the men are in the long hours. It's not just because there's bias, although that's a factor. It's because women literally don't have the same time. And so we've done a lot of research showing that for women to combine these long hour jobs, if they've got any form of care, and women on average do 10 hours more a week of care, then their mental health gets compromised a whole lot earlier, like 7 hours a week earlier compared to the average man. So calculate that out. That's about 480 hours extra a year a man can work without his health getting compromised. Gives him about 12 weeks.
It's a significant, it's like an economic power pellet. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so we kind of think that long hours are heroic, or they should be rewarded, or, they're unavoidable. But what if we also realise they're coming at a pretty big cost? And it's shutting women out in particular.
Hey, I once witnessed such an interesting conversation, and it was between a woman who ran a professional services firm, I think it was a law firm, and she employed mostly women, and they were all refugees from big law firms because they had children. And she ran a cracking firm, great people. And she was talking to somebody who was a senior partner in a more male-dominated kind of law firm. And this woman said to him, you know that I'm subsidising you, don't you? Because people who work for me will take significant parental leave, and I work around that, and I value them, and I hold on to them, and I don't demote them while they're away. And they're all married to people who work for you, who take 2 weeks and, do a bit of mowing and then go back to work. I'm subsidising you. And I thought, my God, she is. Yep. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and so we've done some calculations showing that there's about a 6-hour subsidy going on in the household, a 12-hour gap, and if there's about a 5 or 6 hour subsidy, and if that subsidy didn't happen, men would be working around 41 hours a week on average, and women would be moving up towards 37. So that subsidy is kind of pushing those that way into people's lives and their jobs and their money.
I'm really interested, I guess, Annabel, at the beginning you said that when you started doing this work, all the women were just like, absolutely, so everyone just going, that resonates so much with me. I'm interested in whether, from both of you, whether this analysis, the books, the ideas, whether it resonates with everybody, and what sort of responses that you get when you point out this sort of, this idea, this unsaid, unspoken, unvalued sort of thing. How do people respond?
Well, I was super careful about this when I was writing about it, actually, because I noticed that even among my friends, I would say, you're writing a book? Yes, what's it about? And I'd say, and you'd see the blokes do a bit of like, oh, yes, and then a lot of women would be like, I was going to write a book about that, yes. And so I do find that when if I sit next to somebody on a plane, I'll get a bit of like, my wife has enjoyed your book, and then like, but ladies going like, oh my God, I love your book. So there is definitely a kind of a different kind of, I'd say a level of enthusiasm about having this conversation, I think sometimes. And so I was super careful not to kind of jump into it as a kind of, gender war thing. Because, I mean, to be honest, I think that, there's plenty of miserable blokes who don't love this way of organising things either. So, I mean, maybe I'm sort of naive and some people have told me that I am, but I just from conversations and looking around me, I just think the best thing is really in the end game, the destination is a place where, I've never argued that in any family or, household that everybody will always want to do all the same things. The idea is that if you strip away all of the external pressures and assumptions and kind of sort of tacit bullying that goes on, shoving you to make this decision or that decision because you feel like shit if you don't, kind of toe the line, then people can make their own decisions and as a family and work out the way it works best for them. So I was pretty careful to try and be open-minded and not to kind of make my commentary on it a kind of an exercise in finger-pointing.
I'm interested in this idea of, individuals making their own decisions with everything sort of stripped away. And it just reminds me of a talk that I did. I used to live in the UK and I gave a talk at Cambridge University, bastion of the, men with subsidised wives. But I gave a talk on workplace gender equality, and I thought what was really interesting is afterwards I had one of those uncomfortable lunches with some of the professors, and a professor of economics came to me and he said, oh, very interesting, all very interesting, but in my family, the decisions we make are not about gender. It's very much made on an individual basis. And my wife just had a baby 3 weeks ago, and we made the decision, not based on gender, but based on our individual circumstances, that she should stay at home while I go at work. And he said, but it's not to do with gender, it's just because I made more money and I was further ahead in my career. So firstly, I was like, those things are probably gendered, like the reason you make more money and the reason you're further in your career. But also I said to him, on the basis of that, you could have chosen perhaps to stay at home and let her catch up. And he just looked at me and went, why would I do that? So it just felt like he'd listened to a whole talk on gender equality, all of those things, still couldn't see it, even with all the data there. So, I mean, as someone who's given us so much data in that book, how do people respond to your data?
Look, so we did a paper called Long Hours and Longings, and it was asking Australian dads about their work hours. Australian fathers work long hours. In fact, their hours often go up after kids. And we also had their kids' thoughts about their dads working, and kids were saying they miss their dad. They wished they had more time with him. There was a small group who said they even wished their dad didn't work. And the dads were saying, I'm missing out. And whenever I've gone on the radio with that, it would light up with men saying, it's cost me so much, I've got no choice here. So I certainly think that this is a hard problem for men and women.
But also I think, there's so much research around women's tentativeness in the workplace about asking for, promotion, or about asking for more money and demanding this and demanding that. But one thing that women are super good at asking for is flexibility, and there is this massively atypically large sector of women who work part-time in this country, much more than there are in comparable Western countries. The majority of people who work part-time female, and we have a huge part-time working contingent. And that is it's sort of built into one of the things that it's, okay for women to ask for. Is like, okay, when I come back from maternity, I want to work this way, or I want to work, 4 days a week and 5 the next, or whatever. And there is, not a huge amount of research, but what there is suggests that when men have a change in family circumstances owing to the arrival of a new caring responsibility, they are much more ginger about asking for flexible work. And when they do, they're much more likely to be declined. So, I mean, that is a significant element in all of this as well. It's a real structural issue. And I think, we've paid a lot of attention to how to reduce barriers, on the way into the workforce for women, but we haven't paid as much attention to the barriers that face men as they try and ease back when their life circumstances change, which is actually one of the most kind of sensible things you can do. And I think biology is a bit of a powerful element in this because, I think for women moving in and out of the workforce when they have babies, it's kind of like it's an external disruptor to your work that you kind of cope with one way or the other. But for men, I think, the most disruptive thing on average that happens to men over a sort of average career is if they get made redundant. And it used to be being sent to war, It was like war and redundancy are the big things that really put a kink in that pattern. Otherwise, it's just, full-time work, retirement, death. Whereas women are all like, and maybe that's just the sensible way to work. Because, there's all this sort of, material about the mummy off track and everything, and every now and again somebody will write something like, Sheryl Sandberg, lean in, get back in there, get in the trenches. But, sort of changing the way you work according to what else is going on in your life just seems like a massively sensible thing to do to me. I don't, it should be something that everyone should be able to do. Because the other thing that, you don't get in the mummy off track articles is sometimes you kind of stop doing your job for a bit and you go, fuck, I really hate that job. I don't want to go back. And then you do something else that makes you happier. Whereas I think, honestly, men kind of sort of tend a bit more to wait to be made redundant and then have a crisis and then have a similar kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm just making that up. I just think a bit of moving in and out is a sensible thing to do.
So, Lyndall, I'm really interested maybe to explore this idea because I think a lot of the initiatives that we have where we have recognised that there's issues with work-life balance or with care and things like that have been focused on women. So how do we get women more flexibility? How do we get more women into the workplace and things like that? What are our other alternatives? What are our other levers that we can pull? And are there ones that focus less on fixing women or getting women to be more like men or getting women to be more productive and perhaps focus on either men or on the workplace and systems and structures more generally?
Yeah, so I actually think we haven't really been focused on gender equality in employment. We've been focused on getting women to work. And they're very different things. And we haven't cared that they have to work in different ways and at different hours unless we change work itself. So that the momentum is like, how do we get women into it? So a great example, construction industry. Crazy hours, about 86% men. Can't get enough people. People are health issues, you name it. What's the answer? I know, we'll offer part-time jobs to women who won't get the overtime. Meanwhile, we'll just let the fellas work the 60 hours and crash and burn. And of course, their wives not be able to do hardly any work at all, because they can't, because they've got to run the rest of the house. So the idea is to create this double system, and it really is a double standard. It goes, it's fine, women are working, yay. They're smart and skilled women, but they're in the bad jobs, they're in the short jobs. We'll let work just keep going the way it has for 100 years. We won't in any way ask questions about what that's doing when we've got 48% women, 20% older people. Most people have got care, including the men. So we've allowed women in, but not on the equal terms, because we haven't changed the terms. We've said, if you want to work, prove it, work like a man, knowing that women can't unless something changes on the other side. So that's the double bind we have. We've absolutely stalled in understanding equality in employment as not simply saying, here, have some parental leave, that'll do the trick. Or here's a bit more childcare, that'll do the trick. Until we go, hang on, do we actually need to rethink the whole decision-making framework we've had about work? So I think it was 1909, Barbara, you can correct me on this, the Harvester decision was how we set our... Sorry?
1907.
Yep, close. I knew you should know that. We set how we worked, a living wage. A fella who worked about 40 to 48 hours in those days, give him enough money to support a wife and kids, and we've stayed there pretty much ever since. Except we've got two people trying to make a living. But we haven't gone back to the harvester and gone, is that the right decision? Is that the right framework? Actually, work is not about a person at home who supports a person in the role. It's actually everyone is in the home and everyone is in the work now, and we want that. So to me...
We're still legislatively asking female public servants to quit their jobs when they got married up until 1967. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that was built around the idea that there should be one job per household and it should be...
I mean, we're forgetting the history, which is just dragging us right now, and we're imagining equality is just letting women in the door.
I'm going to ask a slightly controversial question, maybe. We know that time's not infinite, right? We don't have just extended more and more and more time, and I think we've shown that really sort of clearly. Last year I read a book by Oliver Burkeman called 4,000 Weeks, which really makes that point, that time is not infinite. That's the average lifespan, if you all want to freak out, 4,000 weeks. So, but it's a really interesting book because what it critiques is it talks about, I guess, the productivity, the guru-ness around productivity, right? If you talk to any entrepreneur bro, they'll always go 24 hours in a day. Everyone's got the same 24 hours. It's how you use it kind of thing. But I think what's really interesting is that it's all about this productivity. I mean, many of our policies and practice, a lot of the government, how we talk about a healthy economy, it's all about productivity. How does that factor into all of this? Should we be thinking about productivity differently? Should we be thinking about it alongside of other things? I
think it needs a rebrand.
Yeah.
It needs a rebrand because it's one of those concepts that, I mean, if you listen to a radio interview about productivity, just watch people cloud over, They just... Because our understanding of what is productivity is really rooted in a set of industrial assumptions. We think it's an economic concept that's based around the workplace, right? And so productivity reforms, we kind of class in with this whole idea of crane movements or, bushels of grain per hectare or do you know what I mean? It feels like...
I don't know what you mean.
Exactly. Well, this is where we are. We're just like, oh, God, a nap would be nice, wouldn't it? Sorry, productivity, very important. There's a whole commission for it, etc. Built to be ignored by very many generations of governments. Sorry, fine, yeah. But, productivity is really just... How ruined are you right now? Are you able to do your job? What's going on? And half the stuff that ruins people at work is stuff that happens outside of work. And so if you're ruined because you're trying to work out how you're going to do this and that, and then get your kid to a psychologist appointment that it took you 6 months to actually arrange and wait for, that happens during the workday. I mean, that is a massive productivity kind of clamp, but it sort of feels like those situations aren't really necessarily always embraced by the way we talk about productivity reform. And I think it comes down to Padma was talking about this, about our cultural assumptions and our assumptions about what is a proper job and who does what. And in this country, even though we have such an incredible short history as a federation of making really innovative industrial reforms and gender reforms, wow, we still have a really, really strong set of assumptions about whose job it is at the end of the day to kind of pull in the income and whose job it is to kind of look after stuff at home. And when that remains as firm as it is, then there's a whole lot of stuff that we miss in terms of what could make life easier for people, for families, and allow them to do their jobs more productively.
Absolutely.
And one more quick thing. Even the way we talk about economic reform, because if the stuff that Padma was listing, I'm a journalist and I'm a bloviator and a columnist and all of that, so I include myself in what I'm about to say about some of my colleagues, but there's just every day a column about why is there no bold economic reform? We need bold reform. Where's the boldness? And but the boldness is always about, company tax reform, whatever, but the stuff where you're changing the way women live their lives is just sort of somehow it doesn't count as bold, even if it's kind of big and expensive and kind of,
not that bold. Yeah.
No, yeah.
I'm aware of time. We've got a couple more minutes.
It's elastic. We've got all night, really.
I really wish it was. But I'm
an omelette.
I'm going to let you sort of close out this discussion, Lyndall. I guess we've touched on this at a number of places, but I guess I want to sort of end on a really understanding what's at stake here. What's at stake for health, what's at stake for careers, what's at stake for families and future choices.
Great. Look, I think the first thing to be clear is that so many of us have a problem with time, and it also isn't just people with kids. We did this interviews with university students, believe it or not, and guess what? They are incredibly time stressed, and so they're trying to pay their HECS or pay their fees, pay their rents, do their studies, and then maybe do things for themselves. And what happens is they don't do things for themselves. So they are incredibly stressed, they stop exercising, they start living on Coke and coffee, and they are really struggling with this kind of twin pressure. And so the thing they give up when you say, well, how do you make time for your health? They go, health is the last thing. And so we're all doing that. We're writing our health. We're going, it's the last thing. I'll be okay. I can do this another 5 years. I can do this another 2 years. I can do this another 10 years. I can do this another 40 years. And you can't. You start writing your health. So what's happening is people are giving up on their health. They're not sleeping. They're not exercising. They're not actually having the relationships they need. And that's one of the most important things for our health. And they're writing this health, and we are allowing it. We're allowing workplaces to say, yeah, do the extra. Sorry, we can't put more people on, so you'll just have to try and manage this job, even though it's really for 3 people. We're allowing workplaces to say, we did interviews with construction industry, and when we showed them the health harms from working the very long hours, the response was, well, look, I would change ours if it didn't affect profits. Is that really okay? But they thought it was, and they stuck by that. So there is a lot, we have these enormous chronic disease burdens, and they're all to do with things like not exercising, not sleeping, not eating healthy food, and we have
stress and depression.
And they're really showing up in, guess who? Young women who are staring down the barrel of this for their future. And we're going, I can't change it, too hard. Meanwhile, our health system can't pay for people. We can't afford our health costs. So we're really turning a blind eye to what we're actually costing people and allowing, if you like, forgivable excuses that it's okay just to keep asking for this. It's okay to keep pushing for this. It's okay just to say productivity means we'd like you to do more, thanks.
So I think that's a perfect segue. I think you've got a bit of a call for action there. So I think what I might do is round up this mini conversation and now open it back up so we can talk a little bit about sort of policy and change and what that might look like. So we've already heard from Padma this evening, and I'm really pleased to invite Padma back up onto the stage and to ask Senator Barbara Pocock to join us as well in this conversation. Please welcome them to the stage.
Barb's doing estimates this week, so if she starts like really barking questions at Padma, we're just going to like overpower her if necessary.
Absolutely.
Cower.
I might just do a quick introduction for Barbara. Barbara Pocock is an economist and an emeritus professor who has spent her life fighting for the rights of working people, women and low-income workers. She established and led the Centre for Work Plus Life at the University of South Australia and was awarded an AM for services to industrial relations research and social justice. She became a South Australian Senator for the Greens in 2022 and is currently the Greens spokesperson for a long list of things, which is housing and homelessness, workplace relations, jobs and employment, finance and public sector portfolios. Thank you, Barbara, for joining us. Thank you. Okay, so Padma and Barbara, you're both deeply involved in shaping real-world responses. Not that Annabel and Lyndall, you're not involved in those things as well. But, you know, if we're talking about policy, if we're talking about advocacy, if we're talking about parliamentary processes, from where each of you sit, what feels genuinely changeable now? And what sort of feels stuck? Like what is going to be harder to change? Barbara, can I perhaps start with you?
I think Padma should go first. I'll have a go. So just restate what needs to change.
Yeah, what feels changeable, I guess, what feels changeable and what is sort of really stuck and what might be harder to change.
Sitting there listening to that amazing conversation and reflecting on the fact that you've both written these wonderful books. I've yet to read yours. Sorry about
You'll
that.
get a chance.
I want it, yes, please do. And thinking about some books I've written, tragically, books don't change things, sadly. I think they're really important, and I think data is really important. And I think what very motivated bureaucrats and advisors do when they are well funded and supported by a minister who wants to improve the situation of women, that matters. But these are necessary but not sufficient conditions, tragically, because I think the portrait that you two have drawn of women entering the labour market as the fundamental shift of the last 30 years, a massive change in our society, and their necessity as individuals to flow themselves and those they care for around these cement pillars of the way work is shaped. That is a major challenge to us, and not just to our country, but to many, many others. And I think there are changes that have been made in this parliament and the parliament since 2022, which are significant. I think the attempt, for example, to regulate the working lives of gig workers is a very, very important innovation. And when we think about who has control over working time, who does well, gig workers are right at the bottom of the heap. Their time driving to work or doing their job is not paid for. They are under incredible stress. Their lives are on the line. We can see them. We share the road with them. We want their services. They are appallingly paid, and that is a new third world in our labour market. So, you know, regulation matters, good labour law matters, but union density in 1907 was very different to the 13% union density now, and the levers that are available to change the circumstances of workers, gig workers and others, women, are different now. It isn't through a traditional sort of organisation of workers through their trade union. That isn't going to happen. And I think capitalism has really changed. It feeds on women's labour. It has commodified our lives so that our care of our children, the care of our aged, the care of so many people in our community is now a source of profit. And if you look at the housing market, dual incomes where you're paying rent, average rent in most of our cities, or trying to buy a house, you need your partner in the labour market. And that is very different to 30 years ago. The housing market is really changing the way in which people are now compulsively recruited out of their households in larger numbers, intensified in their contribution to work. So I think it's a very big challenge we've got. Changes in capitalism, changes in the voice of workers and their organisation. Very, very concerned women and partners in many cases about the way our lives are, but the levers to shift things are weak. And I think that's a big challenge for all of us.
When you say, sorry, I'm just grabbing the steering wheel for a second, forgive me. When you talk about these sort of cement pillars, some of them are also assumptions about the way families work that have been around for our whole federation. You know, the hours of the school day, for instance. 3 p.m. finish for schools. I went back and read the New South Wales legislation establishing the first New South Wales public schools, and the hours were set then. And there are all these excellent little sub-clauses about how the spouse of school teachers will give Christian education in the number of however many hours a week recompensed. I mean, the assumptions about who was looking after people and how the school day would fit into family or farming life hasn't changed at all, which was crazy because it's completely different now. I mean, how changeable is that?
Oh, so much in that.
Sorry.
I mean, school hours are a product of capitalism. School was a product of people entering into labour around clock time. And care is not clock time, it's body time and it's care time. If you ever care for someone who's dying, forget the clock. And really, if you're looking after little kids, forget the clock. It's about body time and the body. And look at birthing in Australia. They try to impose a clock onto birth and look at the consequences, the highest rate of caesareans we've ever seen in where I come from anyway. And so exactly as you said, it connects to health. So, yeah, I think the adaptations around school are incredibly inadequate. And, you know, anyone who's made that transition, probably many of you in the room, from having a child in childcare to school, oh, my God, you want me to be where at 3:30? Are you kidding? You know, like, so those adaptations, very fundamental, have not occurred. And that's a really good one to raise.
But I actually wonder if we should be trying to figure out how to do more work or how to do more care. So I think a lot of our policy solutions are trying to figure out how we can get more work. And I'm not sure we've had a good conversation about, well, is that the right decision? Is it we actually might need to do more care? And then that really puts work in the limelight as a thing to start figuring out, changing the hours.
Yeah, and maybe I'll pass that to you, Padma, because I think there is technically, you know, there's been a lot of work on that, you know, getting more women into work, and I think that's been successful, and I think we can see that as a gain of feminism. But how do we tackle that other side of the problem?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things about Australia is also how segregated workforces are. We've probably got the strongest gender segregation anywhere in the world. And it goes to all of those themes, right? So in terms of the wonderful Ray Cooper from Sydney Uni, who runs the Centre for Women and Work, always says the only way to change segregation is actually just to pay men more. You're never going to get more men into aged care or healthcare until you pay them more. And guess what? That's just happened. We've seen with the increase in awards for the care sector, we've suddenly started to see more men come in. So I was thinking also about where we're stuck, and I think we're really stuck around that. We're really stuck around women and part-time work, as you were saying, Annabel. We've got some of the highest levels in the OECD, and I've often heard it talked about in terms of choice, an individual choice. I don't think it's about choice. I think it's about some deep structural things. But in terms of what is actually working, and I go back to this, when I speak internationally about what this government has done, one of the things I get gasps over is the fact that we have a finance minister who's also the Minister for Women and the Minister for Data and the Minister for the Public Service. But that's a very deliberate coupling, quadrupling, whatever it is. No other country in the world would have a central agency minister, a powerful minister, also being the Minister for Women. Usually ministers for women are seen as sort of an add-on social policy thing over there. They might get children as well and sport or something like that. So that's actually that point about when you've got leadership that is actually baked in and says that if we actually want to think about women in the economy and how much we're losing, I think the Women's Economic Equality Task Force found something like we're losing $120 billion in productivity in our economy from women not participating. So that was just meandering all over the place. But I think there's some, we do know the recipe for when things can change, but I think some of the stubborn things in Australia are around, if we're talking work, is around that sort of segregation and the way we conceive of work. I also think another big problem we have is around violence against women. When you look at that and the impact that has on women in the workplace. My boss, the Secretary of PM&C, was doing some slides for ministers, and he was showing what's happened to crime over time. And there's a slight uptick in sort of your regular crime since COVID, but you look at sexual assault and it's exponential. And that could be because we're all talking about it more, where we've had movements, we've had women marching in the streets. We're talking about domestic violence more, we're talking about sexual assault more. But we can't take away the impact of violence against women and what that does to women's ability to participate fully in work.
So what I'm taking from that is the solution to the problem is making sure Katie Gala has
Stays
full
over.
portfolios and more. So ironically, give her more work to do.
Time is elastic.
Yeah, that's right, especially hers. I feel like we could talk about this forever, but I do want to give space to open this up for questions in a few minutes as well. So everyone get your thinking caps on for your questions. But maybe I feel like this is important conversations. It's a bit dark in some ways, with a little bit of ray of light at the end maybe. What's the sort of utopian vision? Is there hope? How can we get there? What does that sort of look like? We've given sort of bits and pieces there, but maybe I'll start with Barbara and we'll work our way along. Quick fire utopia.
I think a good life is to be able to do work you love, whether you're an artist or an engineer or on a construction site or an aged care worker, and at the same time be able to be the human being you want to be. And for many people, most of us will not escape care. Even if we make the decision not to have children, we will be caring for each other, for ourselves, for our partners and for those we love. And we aren't well equipped for it. So my utopia is that as humans we were able to do that and still have a roof over our head and a decent life. And I think we are a very wealthy country. If there's a country in the world that's able to do it, we should be able to do it. And I have a lot of confidence actually in younger generations, and some of the things I hear about thresholds for what toleration. There's a lot more mobility amongst some young people, so they're pushing for things that we know we need. So in a decent utopia, there would be employers who got it and you wouldn't need labour law. But we need a firm labour law and we need enforcement and we need recognition of changing technologies that make the boundaries of work and the wage, effort and care bargain more equitable, especially for women. And just one personal thing I say, lots of people say to me, what do you think? Give me some advice. I think the one singular piece of advice I find myself saying a lot to people individually is if you're lucky, you will get your 4,000 weeks and you don't have to do it all, when you're 35 or by then. So I think that taking your time to organise the care and the work that you can, if you can manage to put your economic life together, it's very important to recognise that saying no to that promotional, that full-time work and going for the terms that suit you are very important to a decent life at an individual level.
Lyndall.
Live in your world, Barb. So before I get to utopia, I reckon we could make a huge difference if everyone just worked to our maximum working week of 38 hours. So I've got a pretty modest utopia to start with, is that we just do what we actually have legislated and fought for over 100 years for, which is to work reasonable work hours. And there's this kind of I must, I should and I want cycle people get into with their work hours. And we need to snap that. And if people want to work long hours, go for it. But we shouldn't reward them and incentivise them to do it. Let them do it. Let them follow their passion, but they don't then make the big bucks. Because there are other people doing heaps and heaps of hard work and they're doing it without any bucks at all if they're in the home, or on really low bucks if they're the gig worker paddling on their bicycle. So I'm going to have a very modest utopia, which is just stick to our laws.
Sounds so reasonable when you put it that way, doesn't it? Okay, I'm going like very big picture with my utopia. I think that it is never in the history of human endeavour been harder to be ignorant than it now is. We have, if you assume, as I do, that most human conflict arises from unilateral or mutual ignorance of some kind, we are in an age where that's easier to fix than ever before. And so we should be able to respond with generosity to each other intergenerationally, interculturally, and between genders to an extent that we've never been able to before. And I kind of madly hope that we get there, particularly around intergenerational expectations and judgments. Because I look at, kids of my children's generation, and these people work unbelievably hard and have a degree of conflict and worry and stress and uncertainty and insecurity that I don't think I could have coped with at that age. And yet somehow they kind of are still up for it, which I find extraordinary. And I think those of us who have been fortunate enough to accrue wealth, to live in simpler times, to live in times of peace, surely the least we can do is to open those doors and to err on the side of generosity for those who come after us.
Padma.
How do you follow all of that?
I don't know.
But I think there is something about and I say this as an old woman, but the younger generations. And I think you're right, Annabel, they work, I've probably got kids very similar ages to you, but the amount they have to fit in, but they also, as a cohort, so I've got a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old, their friends and social groupings, they don't have the same rigid stereotypes that we do. And I think that there's a key in there somewhere. They don't have the same, they're much more fluid about gender, which is important. They're much more able to think about gender in a different way. And I think that in itself might help break down some of those really difficult stereotypes. So I'm going to go with the utopia's coming.
And you, Michelle.
Oh, mine. Oh, I didn't prepare because I was doing the
You didn't have
thing,
time to
so-
prepare.
I mean, I would probably go to the workplace because I think we've done a lot of tweaking around. I mean, I'm a psychologist, so it should be with the attitudes. But I actually think there just needs to be fundamental change in how we see workplaces, but also that fundamental change of what we value in society. And I think there's so much on productivity and growth, and I'm not saying those things are unimportant, but I think their value for our society is so big that alongside things like equality, health, well-being, happiness, it's disproportionate. And I feel like if we got those two things a little bit more in line, all of these other things might follow a bit as well. But I guess now we're also interested in what the audience has to say in terms of questions. Do we have a roving mic, Becca? Yeah, okay, we've got a roving mic. We've probably got a bit less than 10 minutes. I think put hands up. Someone will come to you. I'm not controlling this because Becca's got there, but do we have maybe if we've got another mic as well so we can get one to the next one as well? We could probably give one up from here.
Okay, do you want to have mine and I'll nick someone else's if need be?
Thank you. So collaborative and sharing. All right, who's got the mic? Do you want to put your hand up so I can look in your direction? Excellent. Here.
I'd like to thank you all for the insightful comments, and I've just been sucking it all up. That's not a very professional word. And would like to bounce back on some of the comments that were made, particularly, Lyndall, your very last comment before we moved to the full panel up there when you were talking about the stress that our young women are under. And then what Barb was saying as well, it made me worry then if the young women are under the stress already and then they move into, so many of them then having children and trying to balance that with work, and then they move into that type of caring at home and where they still carry the majority of the mental load and the physical load of running the home as well. And then they move into, they're just finishing raising the children and they're still trying to balance work and they don't have as much super. And then they're hitting menopause and then they're hitting burnout and then they're starting to care for their elderly family or their elders. It's still not, there's not much utopia there for women that still doesn't affect men. There's still that, it's still different for women, no matter how we change the other things. So just being able to just say no and take time for yourself just means then it's the less of the promotions at work, the less at work, but you've still got it all at home and you're still all burnt out and that the mental health issues that you're talking about at home?
Well, I mean, I think there's a real problem. We've gone, oh, poor young women, I'll have to figure this out, when it really is on us. And I think it's outrageous that we can sit here and go, hey, my son will earn, on average, 15 cents more for his hour than my daughter. And I'm okay with that. We should not be okay with that. And we should not be simplistic and go, oh, we just kind of need to tell people to pay women more. Because that is, there's every part of this discussion saying this is actually super hard. And to come back to utopia, well, it took 50 years before they showed smoking definitively caused lung cancer, before we had even the first policy step on that. It's been 100 years since we knew that asbestos was toxic, and we're still faffing around with asbestos, particularly in some countries. So it's not like this is easy. We absolutely can't push it onto young women and say, oh, tough. And what happens is those young women, apart from affecting their health, start to make choices. They vote with their babies. They don't have them. And that's what's happening in Korea, in China, in Japan. Economic cataclysm. And no one's going, gee, that's a big cost on our productivity. So it is remarkable to me that no one in government is going, there's our productivity problem. Should we actually do something about that? And that means allowing women to work and have kids, and same for guys. So we have just got a mental block, I think, about how we are addressing this. We're just fiddling around and then hoping the young women will figure it out.
Can I just interstitially insert a remark too about the importance of talking to boys and young men about all this stuff? Because seriously, there is a weird gap between boys of about 15 and sort of late 20s. And I think we've all gone, these boys are going to be, allies of gender equality. And yes, young millennial men want a lot of things in terms of work-life balance that they didn't see their fathers happening. But I don't think we're explaining how this stuff all works to boys well enough, because I see heaps of boys who are a bit like, why am I doing all these workplace, these school classes about toxic masculinity? I'm not a toxic masculinity person. And they see they're outperformed by girls at high school, they're outperformed by girls at university, which they have been for, since the 80s. And then we need to kind of flesh out how all this stuff works, because really the gender differentiation in the workplace doesn't really kick in properly until people start having babies. And that's when it really... am I saying something stupid here? I feel like we've got to get better at talking to young men about how all this stuff works, and also talking to them about, how life changes when you're stop being a person that's cared for by your parents and start being a person that cares for somebody else. That is a boy thing as well as a girl thing. Okay. Is Mike, does that steal yours?
Mine, but I've stolen another one. I think we've got time for one more question, and I think it's just here.
Hello, so I'm standing up because I thought it would be easier for you to see me down there. I am the co-chair and founder of the National Public Sector Neurodiversity Community of Practice, and in my spare time I also work full-time at an executive level. That used to be at PMNC, or write legislation. I also lead a lot of enterprise bargaining activities as a union delegate, individual contact person, leading policy for disability advocacy, accessibility networks. I have lots of free time, of course, and I often work until maybe 3 or 5 in the morning. So I'd love to hear more about time elasticity. This is a little sad, but at the same time, some of the things I have managed to achieve in the last few years include seeing paid disability leave adopted at my agency and in the APS for the first time in Australia. If we take this as one example, and particularly looking at disability, neurodiversity, which is the bleeding edge of working differently, could that be the start of a conversation? Because we know that allowing people to work in ways that suits them hey, it helps the productivity problem, it helps the work engagement problem. Is this how we can make it marketable to the people who don't currently need it?
Okay, who wants to take that? I think what you're also saying is it's a way of questioning the ideal worker, and the ideal worker is about questioning the workplace.
I was thinking about that conversation that we had when we were, having our Zoom before this session, because you and I were both saying, sometimes it's a real buzz to work, until 5 o'clock in the morning when you're really cooking along, right? And you're like, I've never felt so alive. And then I feel like Lyndall is like, Annabel, you've worked your 38 hours. I don't know.
On average.
Right. Oh, thank you. But this is a lot about understanding the way different brains work, right? Because when you've got an idea and you're getting somewhere and you've got a little bit of time, sometimes, it just feels like sometimes when I'm writing something and I feel like I'm having an affair or something. I'm like hiding from my children to go it's terrible. It's very sick, but it also, I kind of get a real satisfaction out of it because I think I've achieved something in a quick period of time. But then because of the way that I work, I'm like, okay, now because I've scratched that itch and I've got that done, I can fully enjoy now taking this time to, do something else. I don't know, but it's a bit resistant to regulation, isn't it, that sort of stuff? And it also is not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah, absolutely, but that's flexibility, right?
Yes, it is. I love it.
And it's work. It's being able to control what you can and can't do. And I think your comment is, well, can we rethink work? So understand that people have different minds and brains, and how different minds and brains do work, and bodies. And
I want labels. I want stitched labels. I would actually like my neuro makeup to be on a little badge so that people go, you're going to be late, but when you get here, you'll be useful.
You'll be going like the clappers. Yeah. Exactly, but some jobs, I think that they're all pieces of it. Starting to go, hey, we're not young, fit, healthy, always on. And we're actually all very different. And if we want everyone to be working and contributing, we're going to have to make it possible for them and not penalise them because they're different. And I think that's the important bit, is that penalising. I don't think we should stop people working because they love working. But I do think we need to stop incentivising that and even creating pressure on people to do that they would otherwise not. And most people do like their work, but there's a large proportion of people, particularly as they work past that 38-hour week, who say, I'd rather not. But they feel they have to. And so we've got this problem with, I want to, but I have to. And we need to allow people to want to, but not have to.
So I wish time was stretchy enough that I could take all of the other questions that were out there. I'm really sorry that I can't. We're going to have to wrap this part of the session over. But Lyndall, could you pass your thing to... So I'd really like to invite Barbara to give us some final reflections, a little bit of a wrap-up and draw us all together. Thank you, Barbara.
I know you're all really jealous that you haven't got my job to do this. What a very, very rich conversation. And I find myself thinking that we've been on this path. I think that our version of feminism has really been talking about these issues now for decades. And I think the first thing I want to say is we're in a mess, and I think that has been confirmed here tonight. We've got a third of us working long hours of work, and we have a lot of part-time work, which women do for choice as they swim around the cement pillars. Women are so smart. Carers are so smart at moving around. And so are people who are different in other ways as well, neurodiverse, people with physical and other differences. We're clever, but we've got a workforce now where a lot of people are doing a massive amount of adaptation, emotional labour, physical labour. And so I think we've got a situation where now our population runs very hard. We run hard. We run hard to pick up kids. We run hard to look after our parents. We run hard to look after our own health. And I had a very clear description of that in the Parliament a year and a bit ago when doing our inquiry into the big four consulting firms. Elizabeth Broderick did a forensic analysis of the conditions of work in EY. a big professional services firm. If you ever want to really scare yourself, and I really hope you don't read it and say that's my workplace, because it's frightening, and these are the architects of the modern workplace. They are the architects of neoliberalism, and they're the architect, and they set the bar. And her report shows how toxic it is, the price we pay. We might want to work to 5 o'clock in the morning because we love what we're doing that night, writing a chapter in your book. You're not going to want to do it every night, and you're certainly not going to do it regularly, because we know what the stats tell us about health. We know you'll die younger, and that you'll certainly be affected. So we know what the issues are, and I think we have a lot of young people who are very anxious about work. They're in a very competitive workplace, and they live in a social media environment where performativity is everything, performativity as a parent, performativity as a worker. That is something I did not have in my first 30 years of working life. What do we need? Well, I think we need a lot of things. I'm really glad that you mentioned leave up the back there, because I think leave is a really critical piece. We've talked about working hours a lot. One of the ways to reduce your working hours is to take every skerrick of leave you have and to have a government that improves your access to leave. So a third of Australian workers now don't have a paid holiday, don't have paid sick leave, because of the precarious nature of work that has happened over the last 40 years in our labour market. Our forebears of 1907 would be shocked and horrified that there are millions of workers in our economy who don't get sick leave. And we saw it in the pandemic, the price people pay. So leave, incredibly important. Control of working hours to actual standards and seeing them enforced, reducing the number of people working long hours of work because of what that does to us, and improving the security of our working time is really also very important. What we've seen in the last 20 years is a dissolving of the boundary around the working day through technology that just leaps over it. And we're in performative cultures which require us to prepare our estimates questions late at night. Not that my staff would ever do that. Liza's shaking her head. You know, there is now ways in which technology have transformed the nature of a boundary around working time, and that is a very big challenge for us. So what will get us there? Well, a right to disconnect is important, but a right to disconnect, which I'm really proud to have been part of with the Labor government, with Katie and others in reforming labour law, is only as strong as your power at work. You can have a right to disconnect that is meaningless for many, many workers because of the driving load of work that comes at them and the cultures that set the bars for what you actually do in your workplace. If you want to retain your job, let alone get a promotion and get to do the work that you like. So we need regulations which put a boundary around work and enforce it, give you a right to disconnect. We need to reduce the length of working day. I think on average, in a wealthy country which generates an enormous amount of new product every year, we should be getting a dividend for the Australian workforce. And the traditional way we have done that for over a century is reduction in working time. Led the world in 1860, I've forgotten, when we led the world on the 8-hour day. We are now at the other end of the spectrum. Where is our leadership to give productivity benefits in terms of reduced working time to Australian working people, especially to women and to carers? So I think we need a few things. We need really great books, and they are important. We need really active bureaucrats, and we need strong governments that are willing to set the agenda and actually follow through.